Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the fourth and final MAP Public Forum for this year. My name is Maxine Lee, and I am an associate of the Melbourne Accelerator Program. Tonight, we are pleased to have Nicholas Gruen as our guest speaker for our topic on public-private partnerships and innovation. Nicholas is the founder and CEO of Lateral Economics, the economic reform and public policy advisory firm. He is a widely published policy economist and is the chair of numerous boards, including the federal government's Innovation Australia Board and the Australian Centre for Social Innovation, just to name a few. He was also the second shareholder and chairman of Kaggle.com and is an angel investor in a number of Australian startups, including bnew.com and Breezedocs. The structure of tonight will be 45 minutes of Nicholas's talk, followed by 15 minutes of Q&A, where we will have roaming microphones going around the room for anyone who has any questions. And before we make a start, please note that this event will be recorded and uploaded onto the MAP YouTube channel, so if you do not wish to be on the film, please move to the side of the room or approach any one of us towards the end of the event. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Nicholas Gruen.
Thank you. Now, it was said that I am the chairman of Innovation Australia, which I am. I'm the chairman of Innovation Australia, the federal government's board that manages things like the R&D tax concession until midnight tonight. So then I may turn into a pumpkin. So we need to get this over with within 3.5 hours. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about public-private partnerships and innovation, and that is an outline of what I'm going to talk about. It's just occurred to me that I should have turned that into a nice acronym, but PETTED doesn't really seem to do it, does it? Anyway, I'll address that next time. I typically think about things from a public policy point of view, but the whole point of this is to try and put together a public and a private perspective. So often, well, the private sector will do what it does. We don't control the private sector. So the focus remains in many ways on the public sector, what to do to encourage the private sector to make the most of the opportunities. But it's still worthwhile trying to think about those two things together. So that's what I'm going to try and do today. So we've got a kind of a part of this talk, which if you like is theory, but I don't think you'll find it boring. I hope you don't find it boring. And then we'll get on to, quite a lot of the theory will be explained with practical examples, and then we'll get on to some of the implications of that. So let me talk about public goods. Public goods, that's an informal definition of a public good, and the idea is that the government builds public goods and the private sector builds private goods. And that idea is kind of basically right, but then again, so crude as to be wrong. I want to explain to you why that is, and let's just start with this diagram that the Ostroms came up with. I don't know what happened to Vincent, but Eleanor went on to win a Nobel Prize. This was written in 1977, or this was produced in 1977, this chart, which is quite well known in economics. And there are two qualities spoken about here, non-rivalrousness and non-excludability. Rivalrousness is the characteristic of something such as this. Any material thing will be rivalrous because if I've got it, you haven't got it. And there are a whole lot of things in life and more things in life which are not like that. And an idea is not like that. Because if I've got an idea, you can have an idea as well, and I don't lose the idea. And the other aspect of excludability, the other aspect of a public good in this way of thinking about it is excludability. So it's very impractical to have to exclude people from suburban roads. If you just think about how you would do that, it would be very hard to do. And as a result, we can't charge people for driving on their local street. And so we have a problem because people can't build something and then say, you have to pay me for using this thing. And so those are the two characteristics that produce a public good in this kind of way of thinking. And the lighthouse is a classic example. It's non-rivalrous, at least until the promontory becomes congested, and there are sort of ships everywhere, and you can't make a ship pay you for taking advantage of the light, because to do that you'd have to say, pay me or I'll take away the light, but you're already supplying the light to all the other ships. So that's the problem. And that is public goods as a problem. Now, there's another side to public goods, and the funny thing is that Thomas Jefferson has put the case more eloquently than any contemporary statesman. Of course, he's around at a time just after the invention of blogging, which was pamphleteering in coffee houses and things like that. And so he's at a time quite like ours, but at the analogue, the analogue analogy of that, the analogue of that. And I won't. I've sort of greyed out the rest of the quote there for the quick readers who can read it. Good luck to you, but you get the idea, and it's brilliantly put. Oscar Wilde puts it rather well as well, I think, and he captures the non-excludability of ideas as well. Just pass them on. So here's the thing. This idea that governments build public goods and the private sector builds private goods, governments build the public goods so the private sector can build the private goods, or the private sector builds the private goods so that governments can build the public goods, is very incomplete. And the more I looked at this, and this is, in a way, I'm presenting this to you as a sort of a bunch of ideas, but it's also a sort of a history of my own thinking about this. And when I was doing the Government 2.0 task force, I used to point out to people for the first few months that these were all public goods and that the government hadn't built any of them. And then I thought about it a bit more, and the other interesting thing was that an existing organisation hadn't built any of them either. They all came out of garages, a remarkable thing. But look at these things. They are non-rivalrous. So what's happening here is the free rider opportunity is outstripping the free rider problem. It's funny, isn't it, that we've got this word in our public discourse about a free rider problem. It's a problem, and it is a problem, but it's also an incredible opportunity. Non-excludability creates a problem for markets, and non-rivalrousness creates an incredible opportunity for our entire species, something that Jefferson was onto. And so with these goods, you actually see some people who've had a choice between worrying about the free rider problem or worrying about the free rider opportunity. And Google and Facebook and Twitter could all solve the free rider problem. They could settle themselves down behind a paywall, and you'd have to pay to use them. And not one of them does that. So their thinking is that they'd rather just take a tiny dividend from a vast amount of value that they can generate as a public good than take a larger share of the value they create as a private good. So on the back of my envelope, I would say that Google creates $1 trillion worth of value for the world and gets by on a measly $60 billion worth of revenue. So there you are. That's my new definition of a public good, not something that's necessarily not excludable, but something that is not excluded. And the more I thought about this, the more I got back to a person who has become more and more a close personal friend of mine, Adam Smith. Because Adam Smith isn't just the author of a book that everybody's heard of, or most people have heard of, called The Wealth of Nations, about markets, but he also, 17 years before, wrote a book called The Theory of Moral Sentiments, which you could think about as a book about the social preconditions of markets. It's about the formation of human culture. It's about all those rules that we have inside our heads, which enabled us to have drinks in the other room, all quietly arrange ourselves. Nobody fought over any of the chairs. Nobody tried to steal anybody's money or food or any of those things. And how did that come about? We came up with it. It just emerged from life itself. And when Adam Smith died, shortly before he died, actually I think it was after he died, he left instructions that his papers were to be burned, except for two papers. One was called A History of Astronomy, and it reads rather like Thomas Kuhn's Structure of Scientific Revolutions, and the other one was a treatise on the evolution of language. Language is another one of these emergent public goods that I'm telling you about, public goods that present themselves to the world without having to be built by the government. A remarkable and very pervasive thing. And somebody else gave me another term that I rather like for talking about emergent public goods, which is a generative commons. We all build these things. We dip into them, we use them as we create them. And just as a brief aside, many of the ills of our society, I hazard to suggest to you, are a product of us shoehorning things where we should really be thinking of our life as part of a generative commons, and there's somehow we've fitted these things into a producer-consumer model, and I'm thinking of politics, thinking of running organisations, and so on. But I will move on. Back to emergent public goods. And as I thought about these things, I realised that there was, rather than say public goods governments, private goods markets, it was much more sensible to talk about an ecology of public and private goods. And the way Smith talks about the way markets develop, and the way another close personal friend of Adam Smith's, Friedrich Hayek, talks about markets developing, is they talk about the certain things emerging from markets. So people come together to try and advantage themselves by making trades with each other, and in so doing they form a market. That market is a public good because other people can come to that market. That market discovers prices. Prices are a form of information. Information is always a potential public good. And so this really remarkable thing emerges from people trying to just look after their own interests. This public good evolves. And it evolves in this ecological way rather than this mechanical way. And if people want to ask me questions along the way, just sort of jump in and if I'm confusing you, but you'll have a chance to ask questions later as well. So another very quick digression is that sort of towards the 1980s, as the deregulation revolution kicked in, some foolish people thought, gee, wouldn't it be good, maybe we could build the world entirely of private goods. There are so many things that we can find out ways for markets to deliver these things. We can have privately built and run freeways and all sorts of things that we thought needed government, and they don't, you can run them without government. So maybe we could have a whole society where everything is for sale. Well, we sort of know a little bit about societies like that as well. That's a society in which there are no public goods, and they evolve from time to time, and we can look at them and decide that they're not quite what we're after. So that's my knockdown, drag-out proof that public and private goods exist in some ecological relation with each other. And the new public goods have brought about a completely new sensibility. Here's a friend of mine, Evstathia Anatolitis. She was, in 2012, having a nice soup at Beer Deluxe, and she decided to turn her knowledge about that into a public good. Bang, there it is. Here's an example of somebody who created a public good. His name's Tim McNamara, and the Christchurch earthquake occurs, and he's in Wellington. He doesn't go anywhere near Christchurch. He sets up in Ushahidi a map of Christchurch and gets volunteers around the world in Crisis Commons to pass 300,000 tweets for information which has a particular geographic code, a particular piece of geographic information like the one that I've shown you down there, and manages to do a huge amount of good, a public good, privately provided and improvised as well. This is amazing. This is an amazing world that we have built. So let's just talk again about public and private goods. Private goods are easy to understand. They're things we look after ourselves. Here are some things that we think of as public goods or partially public goods, because things like health or hospitals can be provided publicly, but we tend to also provide them, it can be provided privately, but we tend also to provide them publicly. And if you look at that list, the interesting thing is that that is a list of the things that are tax deductible if you make donations to them. So we've kind of got some of this, we kind of know this stuff intuitively. So this is kind of uncovering the structure of the way we already think in some senses. And there, I couldn't go without showing you this sublime oath, the Athenian oath, and we use this idea of a public good also to connect the present with the future, to connect the past with the present with the future. And again, maybe ethics, maybe human morality is the technology that we kind of built, the emergent public good that we built to deal with public good problems where cooperation is necessary for us to have those things that we want, that will do us a lot of good. And the other thing I want to suggest to you is this ecology of public and private goods is not at this mass scale of just a bunch of things. So we've got, freeways and languages and things like that on one side, and Apple iPods and various other private goods on the other side, but that this is actually fractal. In other words, it kind of happens at every level. So if you just think of a football team, if you like, then a football team has a group of people in it who are passionately committed, if it's a good football team, to the common good of the football team. And they're also people who understand that they come to the football team with their own private desires. And so the skill, what has to be done is this ecology between the public and private has to be worked out and work well for the football team to work well. And it's the same in families, and it's the same in nations, and so on and so forth. And this all ought to be obvious, but I'm an economist, and it wasn't obvious to me. I got taught that it was all wrong, and I think that this is all the way the world is. And let's just have a look quickly at public and private goods on a web platform, because I would suggest to you that just like every social formation is an ecology of public and private goods, a fractal ecology of public and private goods, that's the case for a web platform. So let's have a look at Google. We go to Google to get a private good, which is personal utility. We want to know who won the Melbourne Cup in 1947, if you like. I'm not sure. That's not a trick question. I don't know the answer to that. Maybe someone here does. Someone can look it up. And so Google gives us that better than anybody else does. And let's say that we search Melbourne Cup, And this thing that we're looking for turns up on as the third link that is served up to us, and a number of people looking for this answer, and they will click on the third link, and what happens? Google picks that up, Google's listening in, and Google converts that we make a contribution, in this case unknowingly, or it just happens, we make a contribution to the public good, which then everybody benefits from, which is freely distributed, and the platform is the medium for handling this ecology. And in the age before, in the analogue age, this stuff might happen over hundreds of years of social evolution, and now bang, it just is a global public good, like Esther Anatolidis's tweet. So things are speeding up and things are getting interesting, and they're getting interesting at scale. So that's the sort of picture I was presenting to you verbally. There it is visually. I don't know how much help it is to you. But as I was presenting this idea a while back, I realised that Facebook does exactly the same thing as far as search is concerned, but it's not using utility, it's using affect. It's using likability, if you like, which is another criterion. And if you want something for likability, if you want to look up something about the Melbourne Cup that's very likeable, you'll go to Facebook. If you're after utility, you'll go to Google. So, but the same alchemy of public and private goods is being performed there. Okay, so that's the theory of it, and I'm going to talk to you tonight about the one implication of this, which I call, which is digital public goods, and the other area that fascinates me about the world that I live in is social innovation and stuff like that. And the same theory that I've just provided you is a front end for me for thinking about the practicalities of social innovation, but I doubt if I'll have time to talk to you about that tonight. So, this world of public goods, this is the new landscape as far as I'm concerned. Over here we have public goods as a problem, and they stay a problem. We can't build a defence force or freeways from advertising alone, or lighthouses, and so they stay over there, and they require some coercive funding. We need to tax people and build those things. And then there are these other public goods, a generative commons on this side, which builds itself, and language is the classic example. And Linux is now, or open source software, is now this incredible thing that should give you goosebumps, which is the language instinct rendered into executive code. It does stuff for us. Is that not a remarkable thing? And then there are all these other things which are generative commons built on a petri dish, if you like, on some platform that somebody's built. You need to spend some money to do that, and people will do that for profit, but they might also do it for the good of the world. So those are the things that sort of, these are my new discoveries. Public goods is a problem, public goods is an opportunity, and so a question presents itself. And the question is this: there must be a space between the things on the left-hand side of the screen and the things on the right-hand side of the screen. Remember that Google, the fact that Google or Facebook could be built is a kind of miracle. And it just happens that you can advertise on this thing, and therefore you can build this platform. There must be an awful lot of other possible things you could build that aren't funding them, that can't be funded by advertising. So what are they, and how can we build them? And so I had that question in my mind about the end of the Government 2.0 task force, which was 2009, and I knew that, so this was kind of theory. And so I had, like this fellow, some Frenchman who predicted Neptune, the existence of Neptune. I had the theory and I couldn't find the planet. So some years later, I wanted this killer example. I could provide some fairly unimpressive examples, but I wanted a killer example. There's my killer example. Anne Wojcicki in San Francisco, then married to Sergey Brin, the co-founder of Google. Things move fast in Silicon Valley. She was talking about 23andMe. How many people here know about 23andMe? I don't know, so that I'll tell you that it's a consumer genomics company. You pay them $99. They send you a plastic kit into which you spit and a self-addressed envelope, and that goes back to 23andMe, and you then get an email, and your genome, or a partial analysis of your genome, is then available, plus, until the FDA got after them, plus an analysis of what susceptibilities you might have to, bowel cancer or breast cancer or whatever. So that's a pretty exciting thing for $99. And they now have 700-odd thousand customers. Their market must be 2 billion. So that's not a really great conversion rate for such an incredible thing. So I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, Anne, trust me, you're my public-private partnership. And I actually went and told her words to that effect. And they don't understand public-private partnerships very well in the United States. They don't have any strong public element of their health system, unlike all other developed countries. But think about Medicare. Think about how you would reconstruct this, operation as a public good from a public-private partnership. Well, Medicare would bulk bill it, $99. It would be less than that buying in bulk. Why would they do that? Because Medicare then gets a capital asset, your genome, which of course it keeps privately and which you don't have to give it if you don't want to. So it's an opt-in system, and the medical system can use that to more tightly target population-based screening, to improve medical diagnoses, to improve pharmacovigilance, and so on and so on and so on. The capital value of that to the health system has got to be a lot more than whatever would be paid for it. In addition, the health system would then, because we have some control of the health system, we can then use it to nudge people into this system at the same time as giving them the ability to opt out. So if you go to the doctor, people say, do you know about this thing? Here's a pamphlet explaining it to you. If you want to use it, sign here, spit here, email here. 2 weeks later, you'll be sorted. So that's a remarkable thing. Just quickly, just with 160,000 customers, they were able to 23andMe were able to replicate 180 genetic associations from their database, and they were able to do that at a cost which represents on again the back of my envelope a 10,000% productivity improvement over the way you would do that using traditional methods. So this is a pretty serious kind of possibility. And those are the kinds of things that a public-private partnership might look like, that a public-private partnership might bring into play. So here's something else which is a public-private partnership. It is in Tasmania, and it is an attempt to put a little bit of public money into the evolution of sensors in sensors, S-E-N-S-O-R-S, for agricultural production and various other kinds of, tourism and things like that. Instead of everyone having their own sensor system, and I'm talking about people like oyster farmers, salmon farmers, viticulturalists growing grapes for wine and so on, SenseT rents them the sensors, and the sensors then generate and then provides them with all the data they might want from the sensors, but leapfrogs that process of decades whereby private proprietary systems would go in and couldn't possibly talk to each other, and instead tries to build this data envelope, this public good for all of the people who can use it to benefit from. So again, you can see the power of getting public and private dimensions of issues aligned. And I think, and have spent the declining months of my chairmanship of Innovation Australia, I think helping to persuade the Australian Treasury, Finance, Department of Communications, Department of Industry, and a whole range of other players that there's something here which we could use to drive innovation in Australia without spending any government money, which you would have thought is an attractive proposition. So I remember 20 years ago going into a display home in the middle of the CBD in Sydney. What the hell was a display home doing in the middle of the CBD of Sydney? It was for the Sustainable Energy Development Authority, and they were showing how you could integrate your security system, your lighting system, your heating system, so that when you walked into a room, the light came on, and when you walked out of a room, or several minutes after you walked out of a room, the light went off again. And you can see that that is going to be a pretty sensible thing to do, a pretty efficient thing to do, and something that would save people money. The remarkable thing is that that technology wasn't new then, it's not new now, and it barely exists. It exists in some offices, in some office buildings, but it barely exists at the home level, despite the fact that it can pay for itself within 6 months or whatever. Why is that? I think because we really have a problem. Our system, maybe any system, has a problem at the interface where systems interact with each other. And if you've worked for a large organisation, you can probably have some feeling for what I'm talking about. So I think we could build what I'm calling an interface program in areas that are important for governments, that are major, where governments are major players as regulators, as funders, as deliverers of services. And so I think we could do fantastic things. And what we would be trying to do is to avoid that problem of being able to say in 20 years, well, we had the solutions, but nobody really took them up. Or they took them up, but they took them up slowly, and now we've got sort of 15 different standards battling with each other and so on. So I think there's a whole lot of thinking and a whole lot of exciting things to be done in that area. CareMonkey, some of you may have heard of. It's only one of, I think, 2 or 3 in Melbourne that does this sort of stuff, and more than that in Australia. And what does CareMonkey do? Well, if you're a parent at a school or a club, you're fairly sick of getting pieces of paper which you sign saying, yes, my son can go on an excursion. This does it all with a website for the family and an iPhone for the teacher or the person at the club. And then if somebody has an accident, they simply go to their iPhone app and they can find a complete description of allergies, who to ring if there's an emergency, and so on and so forth. What is there not to like? My working hypothesis is, I think this is going quite well, CareMonkey, but my working hypothesis is that it isn't forcing its way into the in-tray of every school, and that it would be very easy for schools to just keep doing what they're doing. Is there a largely cost-free way that we can stop this, change this? And I think it would be quite easy. You could, for instance, and this is only a for instance, you could say to schools, within a year, we want you to have done due diligence on this question. We're not telling you what product to buy. You can even keep doing what you're doing, but we don't want to hear that you're doing what you're doing because you didn't get round to actually thinking about it. So that's the sort of thing we could do, and governments could also play a role, again a hands-off role, not a picking winners role, but a role of trying to ensure that information gets out there about which schools are finding which apps the most useful and so on. Just augmenting the market with little prods or little nudges. And here's a pretty impressive business, and it couldn't raise funds in Brisbane where the partners started, and ended up in Kansas City, at the Sprint Accelerator in Kansas City. They're now in San Francisco, starting in Brisbane, and they're reinventing that thing that old people will sometimes wear around the house, which is a kind of a panic button or an emergency button. And you can see just by thinking about it, the moment I've said that, you go, yeah, well, of course, that's something that needs to be taken into the digital age. And what could we do? Well, this is a bit of a show about what you could do.
This is Cloudphone 3G. It's a single-button smartphone for healthier, safer families. It's designed to be the perfect companion for seniors and young children. But it's more than just a phone. It's a smart care system that constantly monitors your loved one's well-being. And our unique cloud technology keeps the whole family connected. Cloudphone 3G is revolutionizing how we care. Here's how it works. Advanced voice controls make calling anyone simple. Just touch and talk.
Who do you want to call?
Call my daughter.
Connecting.
Hi, Mum.
Say a panic word, or press and hold the call button to create a family call. It's an instant conference call that's perfect for emergencies and shares your location while you talk. Cloudphone also monitors falls and lack of movement. It makes everyday living safer. If an event is detected, it asks the wearer if they're okay before calling for help.
Are you okay?
I'm okay.
If they're fine, it returns to sleep and doesn't cause a fuss. Cloudphone 3G also monitors physical activity. Lifestyle Analytics gives you the information you need to make informed decisions. See the real impact of changes in care, medication, or behaviour on physical activity, and prevents small health problems from growing into big ones. Cloudphone is great for loved ones on the go too. Our SafePath technology automatically monitors regular transit activity, like travelling to and from school. If your loved one leaves the approved path, get an instant notification and view their location on your phone. Plus, with automated check-in, you know the moment they arrive home safely.
Everyone laughs at this stage when you show the video. They're not thinking of kids. Okay, so I think that shows the power of what I'm talking about. And they've made the thing look a lot classier now, and they're working away in San Francisco. So here's something from the Melbourne Accelerator program, which again is the kind of thing which governments could help, if it's a great product, which it looks like it is or will be, that governments should be baying to get hold of and find ways in which it can lower costs and improve outcomes. But the chances are that the places where it can do that won't have been built with management systems to actually detect this and to make the best of it. That's what I'm suggesting has to be done, and what we might be able to, and maybe we can talk a bit more about that in questions. This is a Melbourne-based startup, Murmur. The company's called Culture Amp. That is employee engagement software. It's being successfully sold to Adobe, Box, and a number of other big companies in the United States and small companies around the world. A government could say to Culture Amp, but it could do this through a tender, so it doesn't have to, again, be picking winners. We would like to make a payment. What would it have to be to make this software available for free in a fully specified form to businesses with under 50 employees? That's a highly efficient way to take advantage of the free rider opportunity, but it's more than that, because it creates all sorts of additional benefits, because you would get a standard from that particular survey, which would then enable you to make comparisons, make introductions between firms that could help each other in different industries with similar problems, or one firm solved a problem that another firm hasn't, and so on. All sorts of possibilities there. This is a company that I've got an investment in. It it basically does semantic recognition of documents in PDF form, and it's being developed for the mortgage industry, but it could be used for all sorts of government form filling in as well. But governments are not part of the development as much as the private sector is, and that's something which could be changed. That's free practice management software. Again, I have an investment in that. And again, there are all sorts of free rider opportunities there of the kind that I've suggested with other businesses. So I call this government as impresario. I have taken, and this is a summary of the repertoire, if you like, and I haven't been through all those things. I could do that in response to questions, but there are all sorts of kind of subtle ways, in the same sense that freemium models or advertising models or referral models are kind of clever ways of monetizing an asset sufficiently to make it viable, and then the surplus beyond that is shared between the entrepreneur and the society, usually mostly by the society. That's what we should be trying to think about, and I think we can do that without any cost to government. Although if there is some cost, then that's fine too. We spend a lot of money on innovation, simply handing money out to putatively innovative firms. I think there are larger dividends per dollar in attending to these interface questions. And I think a lot of businesses that are involved in the MAP are interface businesses. Markets are interfaces. Adam Smith, when he says it's not from the benevolence of the butcher, the baker or the brewer that we expect our dinner, is actually talking about an interface between buyer and seller. He's talking about a human relation. And yet economics has reduced this to things, but it's the relation that matters, and it's this relationship that occurs at the interface where I see so much fertility for doing things better. So I will leave it at that, and very happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicholas. I've got two questions. Firstly, do you think governments understand innovation and what they could be doing to, for example, with the care monkey example? Well, that's pretty simple. And the second one is, you had a screenshot there with 52,000 unread emails. Is that correct?
Was that mine or?
I suppose so. It's your Gmail account, I'm guessing.
Was it? I didn't know I'd done that. Look, I'm pretty good at returning my emails. But I guess I've got some work to do. So, no, governments don't understand innovation, and why would you expect them to? That's not a smart-ass comment. I don't think even governments that are quite successful, governments in countries where innovation has been pretty successful, like Israel, America, they don't understand innovation either. They're bureaucracies. Large firms don't understand innovation. I think one of the things that's happened with innovation today is that barriers to entry collapsed with the building of these platforms in many ways, not the internet, but all the other platforms like Google and so on. AWS is a good example, Amazon Web Services. The barriers to entry collapse. You didn't have to have a huge investment in serving the web. You just rented it off Amazon Web Services and it goes up and down like this. And so people can do things that almost nobody understands. So this idea that we want governments to understand innovation is a kind of, if I might be permitted to wax a little, it's a kind of narcissistic fantasy of innovators. We don't understand each other like that. Innovation is about doing surprising things. So if you want to think about government activity to optimise innovation, don't want them to understand you, want them to try and work out a regime in which the innovators get an even break against all the people who are trying to stop them and all the people who are telling them to fill out forms and get permission and all that sort of stuff. And governments are also the arbitrators of multiple social demands. I want my privacy, I want my tax cuts, I want my kids to go to a good school, I don't like the fact that the teacher yelled at my kid, and so on and so on and so on. So they have to kind of cope with all that. So then we're not going to get fine-tuned performance out of governments, but we can try and apply our minds to the sort of systematic ideas that governments preside over and try and run their operations according to. I think we can adjust those to some extent, and that's kind of my hunting ground. Yep.
So a lot of us here, me included, inventing technologies that, and the reason why we're doing it is for a private benefit. So we're actually doing these things for personal gain, unashamedly. Is there a forum? So I've never considered the public benefit of the things that I'm doing. Is there a forum where some of us can get together and understand what that public benefit is?
Well, it's a big thing. There are a lot of innovators who are thinking about public good. It's a kind of a social movement. I'm not saying you should necessarily, but people have been talking about this with increasing intensity over the last decade or so.
So yes, I can see from some, especially in the health area, there's lots of public good that people know about and talk about, but there's also a very large number of us thinking about private good and not looking, because the thing that I'm working on, I think, has the potential of public good, but I'm certainly not looking there because I actually haven't considered the concept before. So my question is, is there a forum where
Well, there are lots of forums. This is one of them. And there are, I'm the chairman of this organisation called the Australian Centre for Social Innovation. I mean, we don't have a program specifically addressed to that question. But, I mean, one of the things that I've noticed is that when I was at uni, a frightening amount of time ago, a lot of the people who wanted the world to be a different and better place went and joined the Socialist Workers' Party and the Communist Party and this and that. And a lot of people now are saying, well, that's all hot air, but what can I do? Can I bring about a situation where more people in Africa have got running water? Can I help make a housing commission flats in Richmond less dysfunctional? There are lots of people running around doing that stuff, and they're facing the dilemma, which is, I want to do public good. How do I get enough private sustenance to do that public good? So they're facing the problem from the public good, but they've got the same problem that you have, in a sense, or they've got there's that same issue of the ecology of public and private good. If you think about I don't know whether you're familiar with these sort of fancy terms, but corporate social responsibility is a sort of defence. It sort of was introduced as a sort of defensive idea that if I'm going to make a lot of aluminium and I'm going to belch out all this carbon dioxide, I want to do some PR to make sure that I look good in the press, so I'm going to increase office recycling, for instance. And that has morphed into something much more promising, which is shared value. The idea that a large corporation like Unilever, for instance, might say, well, we're about making profit for our shareholders, but there are a whole lot of things we can do at somewhere between small, negligible or negative cost to ourselves, which would do huge social good. So I think it is the case that Unilever has a corporate goal of saving 20,000 lives a year. How does it do that? Because it's involved in introducing water into Africa, water systems into Africa and so on, and it can tweak what it does at negligible cost to itself and save lives. Google does the same thing during crises. It will make its server capacity available. So it's happening at a large scale and a small scale. And the other sort of exciting thing about it is that one of the reasons that firms get into this stuff is there is a self-interest there. Now, I spoke about the self-interest, the defensive self-interest, but I was talking to somebody in a major consulting firm a few years ago, and I said, how much do you spend on pro bono work? He said about 5% of payroll. Why? To get the best people. People like to feel like they're actually making a contribution, not just to the private good. So there's something which, if you think about it in an imaginative way, gives you 5% of revenue to spend on public good. And remember, if you're a successful firm, you've got a lot of assets. And 5% of revenue, letting your employees loose doing things that turn them on and make them think great and get them to talk well about you and get more employees in, 5% is a lot of money when all you're doing is letting out a bit of extra server capacity on the weekend and paying the electricity for it, for instance. So there are all sorts of opportunities. It's incredibly exciting, but it's not easy to fit it to, it's an entrepreneurial process. It's a process of discovery by increments, not, okay, here's the plan, everyone do this. So we're not going to be saved by the Socialist Workers' Party, it seems.
Hey, Nicholas, really good talk.
Thank you.
A lot of it really resonated, so thank you. Just wondering, so the nature of innovation is obviously really fast-paced. How do you see the government will potentially adapt, considering they're very bureaucratic?
Well, I presented one way in which I think they can adapt. But more and more, what matters is sort of practice rather than theory, if you know what I mean. If this stuff is to be done well, the sort of stuff I'm talking about, it will matter whether the people who are sort of, let's say that the Victorian government wanted to announce something like my interface program, then it would matter how well motivated and how excited about it the people involved in it were. Because it's not really about money, it's about the quality with which you do things. So to do that well, you need to devolve some authority to people at that level. So we kind of know that, and we're starting to try and do that, and we will learn how to do it, probably slowly and unevenly. And then when things are done that are done well, people want to copy them very quickly. So the Victorian government introduced the market validation program a few years ago now, which is a program which is a kind of a textbook version of the sort of program I'm talking about. It had some funding attached to it because everybody loves funding, and a minister needs funding to have an announceable, really. But the idea was to try and get departments to identify research and development needs, like my Breezedocs example, and give them a budget to go and do that. So, people are, and the reason I quote that is that I think that's a good idea. I think it's worked quite well, and within a fairly short period of time, governments wanted to copy it. So the federal government wanted to copy it. So it's like a large organisation. It's innovation. It's kind of 2 steps forward, 1 backwards. It's just a process of learning, and it's and the thing is, a lot of it is this ecological learning or organic learning rather than mechanical learning, where you just say, "Here's the new policy, roll it out." But it's an interplay between those things, so that the market validation program is a set of theoretical ideas and a budget, and then you try and get the learning to take place underneath it.
Nick, I want to ask a little bit about risk, and in particular, one of the features of state provision of public goods is that, at least in theory, states are long-lived enterprises. Whereas...
Well, in practice most of the time.
And in practice most of the time. But, one data acquisition by Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook could go down the tubes relatively quickly.
Yeah.
What does that mean for this notion of public-private partnership, the notion that these platforms are, in some sense, more fragile in the long term?
Well, it's a good question. I'm not sure what it means. I mean, they're more fragile, but if Google went broke, we'd hardly notice. We'd all move to Bing. Or rather, somebody would just buy up Google. So there is a sort of there's a strength through diversity in the marketplace. I mean, certainly the question of risk is a pretty interesting one, but I think the answer is that, and likewise, if something pretty similar would happen if a state government went broke or something, which sort of happens in various places. The assets remain there and they have to be recapitalised, and we have to invent a new capital structure, whether something is in the private or the public sector. But so long as there's peace and all those kinds of things, it's amazing how efficient we really are in the fundamentals.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks for coming down this evening. One thing I've sort of noticed is this transition between not-for-profit and for-profit, and in the middle, it's like a for-good model where companies are using for-profit sort of systems to then generate more profit to then be used for good. What would be your advice for a company that needs to still have this growth and good revenue, but then to apply that to a for-good model that would still not hinder its, ability for prospective investors?
Yeah, well, it's a completely fascinating question, and a CRC sent me a few days ago a proposal where they have some technology and they want to think about how they exploit that technology, and they have to think about their own interest, but they're a creature of the public purse to a substantial extent. And anyway, universities have this same question. We don't know much about it other than our common sense. Economists haven't done any really good work on this that I know of, and it's something that I want to try and develop a bit. It's just a really interesting question. I was talking to a firm that I have an investment in San Francisco called Sound Focus, which is building hearing aids that don't cost between $2,000 and $8,000 to fit by an audiologist, but cost $140 and you tune them on your smartphone. And I was talking, and they want to make profits, and at the same time they're well disposed to the idea of trying to do good. So then you've got a really interesting theoretical problem. And I was thinking, and so I said to them, you could ring up the Gates Foundation and say, we want to define the rights of a not-for-profit company alongside this for-profit company, and we want this company to optimise the social value that can come out of this intellectual property to the extent that we've defined a set of rules that minimise the harm to our profits. Sense-T, which I showed you in the slideshow, I got the idea from Sense-T, because Sense-T is a not-for-profit joint venture, if you like, between the various governments and the University of Tasmania. It's owned 100% by the University of Tasmania, I think, but that's just more power to their negotiating arm. That's not where all the money came from. And they have recently launched SenseCo, which is the for-profit part of the venture. So all I was doing was kind of rearranging the metaphors, rearranging the idea. And as far as I can see, we haven't thought about this at all. So the model we've had so far is Bill Gates makes as much money as he possibly can, and everybody's shaking their fist at him and saying what they think about him, and then it turns out he plans to give it all away. So that's one public-private benefit, but I think these things can be fitted together with more finesse, more felicity than that. And that's an exciting thing to think about, because virtually any technology, any digital technology, has got these two aspects to it. So it's pretty exciting. It's a pretty exciting thing to think about. And it doesn't surprise me that I don't know a single economist who is thinking about it. Yeah.
Interesting talk, and you introduced it by someone who's spent their life in Folkestone thinking about the public good.
Yeah, that's my curse.
That's right, and I believe it is a curse, in fact.
Well, it's fun,
because
it's worthwhile. But
one of the assumptions you're working with is you're working with the structures, the governmental and decision structures we have. And
trying to change them where possible.
And that's the real issue, because my observation is they have no idea of what you are talking about fundamentally. And in your talk, you introduced a few terms like nudge, which suggests that you, as an economist, have adopted some of the behavioural economics developments. So my issue is, it seems to me that one of the real dilemmas here is that the governmental structures we have actually can't address, for a whole lot of deeply structural reasons, a lot of the concepts you have. And I'll give just one example, is the e-health record, which is obviously a good idea. The implementation by the government is a disaster.
Sure.
I suspect
Would you like fries with that?
Apple's newly released iHealth app
Yeah.
will have more impact, more effect, and
Yeah.
be more successful
Yeah.
than the government thinks you. Most people in this room have, in my experience, a deeply cynical attitude to government. And I think it's very well based. They don't care whether it's Labor or Liberal, they're all fairly useless.
Well, they're very good, actually.
Well,
I mean, it depends what you want, but the reason, it's a glass half full and it's a glass half empty.
Indeed
It's
it is,
staggering
indeed
how
it is.
stupid they can be, but it's amazing how much better they are than they were in the 18th century. Here we are on the 10th floor.
Yeah, that's true. And I mean, but they delude themselves about what they are able to do. And
Well, often they don't delude themselves. They get into role play, and we insist on it. If you don't get into role play, you get into trouble on the
For me,
media.
you raise a whole lot of very interesting issues. You explore
Yeah.
the role that the private sector has in creating a public political good out of a place that traditionally doesn't happen. The good chance is that will grow, and I worked in the state government at a time when the state government was important. Today, the state government is a pure functional delivery of services. The federal government is heading exactly the same way. And the dozen companies you have highlighted are all bigger and more powerful than many of the individual sovereign governments in the world. It's an interesting development where we're heading. And the public goods may well come out of private sector activity.
Yeah, absolutely. So all I'm trying to do is, use some words, come up with some theory, paint some pictures that have some impact, help people think some things through, and that can be quite powerful. I mean, I've seen situations where ideas have gone from, ridiculous to obvious without there are things. I mean, tariff reform is an example. In 1968, Max Corden said that discussion about tariffs in Australia, given that the textbooks told you that the right tariff was a dead tariff, was academic, and then 10 years later, 1978, they'd been cut by 25%. Another 10 years later, it was more or less inevitable they're gone. So I've got to concede that it's infuriating to me that we've been so lacking in imagination in trying to develop that story of knocking off tariffs and then trying to keep thinking in a constructive way, in the way that Adam Smith thought about. Instead, we turned it into a kind of formulaic, dull, a formula for doing stuff, and we sat there. But this is a whole new agenda. So look, these people don't snap to attention. There's no doubt about that, and maybe that's not such a bad thing. we've been 200 years getting here, and things, that this is a big, immense public good, and it takes a lot of time. And we're managing to rerun this experiment in the West in the developing world at warp speed. That's pretty extraordinary. But yeah, we can't perform miracles, and we don't actually know how to. I've got sort of glimmerings here, some ideas, but I'm just a little guy, and I'm reminded of it. I won't remember it exactly, but I'm reminded of a expression by John Henry Newman in a book called The Idea of a University, where he talks about trying to moor an ocean liner with a thread of gossamer, and that's what talking's like. You're just trying to provide the filament of an idea, and sometimes that can really crystallise things, and things can actually arrange themselves according to the idea. But it's miraculous if it happens once in your life, and it's happened once or twice to me, so that's pretty good. But it's a long haul.
Thank you so much, Nicholas, for sharing your insights with us tonight. We have a small token of appreciation for you. It wasn't very well concealed, so you probably know what it is already. So here you go. Everyone, please join me in thanking Nicholas.